All right, hello everybody. We're going to go ahead and start with Unit 5. This will be our first topic in Unit 5. There's a lot of different things we're going to be talking about. This is a very long unit, but the first environmental concept that we're going to talk about is deforestation. So Unit 5 is largely going to delve into how humans impact those natural systems that we talked about in Units 1 to 4, and how we can more sustainably try to mitigate the amount of damage we do, but also be able to benefit from the environment as a whole. All right, so forests are a common resource, so think of the tragedy of the commons, that provide ecosystem services. And we're going to talk about some of those services today. Right? Now, when we talk about forests are going to be classified into three major types. You have old growth forests. These are forests that have existed undisturbed for a long period of time, high biodiversity, climax community, and all that. The secondary forest is going to be essentially a forest that is currently developing through secondary succession. So here we can see that we had a bunch of logging practices. When this forest begins to grow back naturally, it's going to be going through a secondary forest for a long period of time. So essentially secondary forests lead into old growth forests, but it can take hundreds of years depending on the type of forest we're working with. And then the last one is going to be commercial forests. These are forests planted solely for the purpose of trying to cultivate one single type of resource in a very large quantity. Think of it like a farm, but for trees. Now, when we cut down these forests, we're going to have three different methodologies, some of which are more sustainable than others. The first one is going to be strip cutting. This is where you cut along contours on the forest. So you kind of find certain sections in which you think it's more practical to cut than others. In clear cutting, you literally just cut down everything. And then in selective cutting, you're going to cut down very selective trees based on how large they are, how mature they are. So if you think back all the way to Unit 1, when we did that tree cutting activity, right, a lot of you had a law in which you were only allowed to cut down trees that were size 4. So that would be an example of selective cutting. Now, clear cutting is going to have the largest environmental impacts. Now, you're going to be seeing a lot of these flow charts as we go through all of these different topics in Unit 5. And essentially how they work is I put the environmental or human process here in the center, and then I talk about all of the consequences of that environmental task. So, for example, we have clear cutting a forest. So the first impact of clear cutting a forest is that it removes a sink for carbon dioxide, which increases greenhouse gases, which is going to increase average global temperatures. Also, when we stop having carbon dioxide taken in from the atmosphere, that's going to reduce the amount of carbon that is available in our soil and for decomposition. Next, we talked about in the watershed video, you're going to reduce the amount of shade that is provided by plants, which is going to increase temperatures of local land and water ecosystems, which is going to make it difficult for new generations of plants to germinate and also organisms and aquatic ecosystems as well. Okay. You're also going to reduce your future economic assets and reduce biodiversity through trophic cascades. So the more you cut down, the slower it's going to be to grow back, which means in future years you can have less and less economic returns. Think back to that Unit 1 activity that we did on deforestation. You're going to reduce transpiration rates. So plants are able to, if you think back to the water cycle, take liquid water and turn it to water vapor, which is released into the atmosphere. And that is a big, important role in terms of determining humidity. So you're going to have less humidity in the area, which might affect certain organisms. You're going to reduce overall root biomass, which means you're going to have more erosion, which means you have more cloudiness or turbidity in local aquatic ecosystems. And this is going to have a lot of impact, including predator-prey relationships will be impacted. You're decreasing the albedo of the water, so it's absorbing more sunlight, which increases temperature, which drops dissolved oxygen levels. And also, more runoff and erosion can result in eutrophication, which means you have nutrient pollution in your water, which can create dead zones overall. So we can see all of these impacts that are caused by clear cutting. Now, I understand there's a lot of new vocabulary here, like eutrophication, dissolved oxygen. It's okay. We're going to get through all of this by the end of Unit 5. but please make sure you still make a note of it, and then we'll come back a little later and kind of talk about it more. But it is important that you write it down or print out this table, because as we go farther and farther in the unit, a lot of these different types of environmental impacts become more and more common. Now, there's a lot of reasons that deforestation occurs, and a lot of it has to do with whether or not you're developing or you are a developed nation. So, for example, if we look at developed nations, typically it's just basic forestry or wildfire loss is going to be the main two reasons that we have deforestation. When you look at more developing nations, like down here, it's going to be either commodity driven, which means heavy economic impact, or it's going to be a lot of agricultural stuff. So we need to cut down forests to make room for agricultural activities through things like slash and burn, which we'll talk about a little later in this unit. A good case study of this is the Amazon rainforest, and we will actually be looking at this in class on Monday. This is an example of an area in which deforestation has become a continual issue. So you can see the size of the forest increase over time. We've seen a slight increase as some environmental laws have been passed to try to protect the forest, but overall we're still looking at a pretty significant decrease from the early 2000s. All right, so now that we know about forests, how do we manage them and how to become more sustainable in our practice? Well, there's a couple things that we can do. First, we can reduce the amount of demand we have for tree products. This includes something called full cost pricing. Full cost pricing is where not only do you charge for the good, but you charge for the environmental damage that producing that good did as well. So you might charge extra for the product because then you have to pay to replant the trees that you're cutting down in the first place. Also, finding alternatives to lumber, things like plastic, cements. Obviously, all of those are going to have environmental impacts as well, but it does help with deforestation. And we can also use improved techniques. So use commercial forests and already cleared lands. So using commercial lots instead of old growth forests that already exist. Harvesting from secondary forests and not old growth, so you can maintain high biodiversity in where the forest still exists. Using recycled wood. And then when you do have to cut, using selective cutting or strip cutting instead of clear cutting as well. And you can actually verify that these are done by getting certifications on your timber to know if it's grown by sustainable methods. You can actually research if the wood you are buying is using best practices for sustainability. Now, humans don't just impact forests through disease spread. Through deforestation alone, but we also affect them through disease spread and also forest fires. A lot of times, humans, when we travel from state to state or country from country, we can unwillingly pass invasive species off, including bacteria and fungi or insects that can impact the health of trees. Things like the ash borer here in Michigan would be a good example. In terms of fires, humans cause a lot of fires. In fact, if we go back up here, we can see wildfires are one of the main causes of forest loss. Now, obviously, wildfires can be natural, and not all of that percentage is due to humans, but humans definitely increase the amount of fires that do occur. Now, when we talk about fires, there are going to be three main types. You have ground fires, which is more just like a smoldering, a light burning of organic material. You have surface fires, in which flames are very visible, and you're burning mostly ground level stuff, bushes, saplings, low-level trees. And then you have crown fires, which the entire forest is on fire top to bottom on the trees. Typically, natural forest fires exist in one of these two areas. However, humans can increase the amount of crown fires that go on. And while it's nice that we get biogeochemical cycle, nutrient recycling in ground and surface, crown fires can often do more damage than good for the forest as a whole. So let's talk a little bit more about how we can prevent disease spread and how we can prevent forest fires. So if we have humans prevent regular burnings, we get a buildup of organic matter resulting in more crown fires. So if we go up here, typically what we want when we talk about forest fires is we want ground and surface. But humans not only start fires, but they can prevent a lot of fires as well. So what happens is you get this huge buildup of organic matter on the ground. And then once all that organic matter catches fire, that's when you start to shift into crown fires which is unhealthy for an ecosystem as a whole. Okay. So kind of a solution for that is prescribed burns, in which you do regular burnings of the forest and make sure no human infrastructure or life is in danger when that occurs. In terms of the disease spread, humans can use different types of pest management solutions, not exactly pesticides, which are chemicals, but we can use something called integrated pest management, in which we physically remove the organism through things like physical traps or prescribed burnings, and not using chemicals that can kill other organisms as well. All right, that's going to be it for today. We will look at ecosystem services of forests in our activity during our next class period.